Well, hello, buddy, and welcome back to the Showrunner Whisperer. This is your podcast where we take you inside the minds of television and Hollywood showrunners and what it means to be a showrunner in today's television landscape. I'm your host, Andy Behbakht. Andy, as always, to our old listeners, welcome back. To our new listeners, welcome for the first time. So happy to have all of you here, and we're here for another episode. And it's y'all. May is going by quickly. Like I'm not ready for summer to get here this fast. But I it's gonna happen. It's gonna happen. And but just because summer is getting here, it does not mean that we're going away anytime soon. We have lots of more episodes coming up. And first of all, major thank you to everyone who checked out episode 4 with part 1 of the James and Chad interview for Gotham Knights. A lot of people were messaging me afterwards and were like, "Damn, I was not ready for the stories they were gonna tell us." And I'm like, "What do you think I was? I was not ready when we had that chat." So part 2 will be coming out in June, and I had such a good time chatting with them, and there's more things for them to reveal to us. So get ready, stay tuned, and look forward to that. Again, if you haven't checked it out already, it is available on all the podcast platforms where you can listen to your podcast ad, as well as on the YouTube channel for Multiverse of Color, which some of you may be listening to right now. And if speaking of subscribing, if you haven't done so already, do me a favor. First, subscribe. It helps a lot. But secondly, we would love to see some 5-star reviews up on Apple Podcasts, because that's a great way to support a podcast. It's free, and it's also a great way to help other listeners discover the show, because not everyone uses social media, and which I totally understand. Today, social media is mostly garbage, so I don't blame people who are not on social media. But for the people who aren't on Facebook, Twitter, or what have you, the more positive reviews we get for the Showrunner Whisperer on our podcast, Spotify, you name it, the more people are going to discover it. And we want to grow this this amazing little TV community, because you're listening to the show because you love television just as much as I do. So if you could do that, that would mean a lot to me. But for this episode, for episode 5, y'all, we're already at episode 5, y'all. For episode 5 of the Showrunner Whisperer, I had the distinct honor of chatting with JAKE WYATT, who is one of the showrunners of My Adventures with Superman. So My Adventures with Superman was a new DC animated show that premiered last year on Adult Swim, and it's focused on the early days of Clark Kent, Lois Lane, and Jimmy Olsen in Metropolis, as they're finding themselves as reporters and journalists at the Daily Planet, but also how they became this iconic trio, and also the story of Clark becoming Superman, which, again, this was one of my favorite new shows of all time. And it's finally season 2 is premiering this Saturday on Adult Swim, with the first 2 episodes dropping at midnight, and then followed with the weekly airing of individual episodes on Adult Swim. And also, if you're someone who subscribes to Max, you can also check it out on Max, because that's when it will also become available. And I've seen the first 2 episodes, and I can't give spoilers out, obviously, but they are amazing. For anyone who watched the show last year, listen, we're in for a trip. And for anyone who hasn't checked out the show, all 10 episodes is currently available for streaming. Go check them out before Saturday, and then check out season 2, which is going to be amazing. But yeah, I got the chance to chat with Jake a couple of months ago. Again, this is how generous a lot of showrunners have been, that even before I had even announced this podcast to the world, so many of them were willing to come on and chat with me about their journey of becoming a showrunner and what it means to work in Hollywood today, especially with everything that happened last year. So there's a lot of things that he talked about, like how the show got created, and kind of the big journey of, because the show was announced in 2019 to be in development, and we just got the show last summer, so it was a long road. But yeah, I'm gonna stop talking and let you guys enjoy this episode of the Showrunner Whisperer with JAKE WYATT, and I will see you at the very end. So with that said, cue the music, and I will see you soon. So something I've started every episode I record with any showrunner, the first question I always ask them is, because I always find everyone's answer is very interesting, is, what is your definition of a showrunner?
Oh, So I was just talking about this with some friends. So I'm a generalist, right? I write, but I also animate and design. And I've directed and art directed. So and I work in animation, which is like this multidisciplinary weirdo field. So you have all different kinds of showrunners. I've had showrunners who didn't write or draw, right? Or that's not fair to say, but I've had showrunners that were neither the head writer nor like any kind of like storyboard lead, like Jonan Vasquez from Invader Zim, where he wrote with Brian Burns and he didn't do any of the storyboards or really touch them, but he had this very specific idiosyncratic vision for the show, right? So like he was the show, and you felt stuff become right and turn into Invader Zim, like when it went through him and when it got his notes. So I think like the most universal thing I can think of is like the person or people who have the vision for the show and lead every other department from, you know, the writer's room to the story room to the design team in the execution and articulation of that vision. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, like it's, a lot of people that have answered it, they talk very much about it's very much about managing almost like a company in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it starts, so before anybody shows up, it is about having and selling and articulating of an idea for a show, a creative vision, right? And that part of it is almost unrelated to the management of human personalities, because that's what it turns into. Like it starts out and you're this artist, right? You are this like author, storyteller, and you're like, this is the beautiful thing that I want to create. And you sell that to several rooms full of executives, and then you get your crew on and you sell that vision to them as they come in. Each writer, each director, each artist, you're like, this is the show, this is what we're making, this is what we're doing, welcome on board. And then once everyone's like in place, it is about managing their personalities and helping them get along and helping them stay on track without pissing anybody off to the point where they become unhappy or unproductive, or God forbid, both. So yeah, so it's like this very creative thing, and then it's this very diplomatic, political, managerial thing.
I know that for you guys in Hollywood, you guys are just, we're coming off these major strikes in last year, but I know that in the world animation, because I'm not fully sure how did the strikes affect you guys who worked in animation? Because again, I feel like in your case, your show was just coming up, but was getting ready to come up during there was the strike. So like, where were you in all of this, and how are you feeling about this? Post strikes today, in terms of like all the deals that have been made and whatnot.
So I'm thrilled that the strikes were successful, for both the WGA and for SAG-AFTRA. Like I'm thrilled. I'm so glad that they got concessions. If anything, I wish that they had gotten more. And I'm really pleased that they were able to unify and force Capitol and PTP to give them at least some of what they deserve. At the time, it was wild because I'd been working with these actors for years. I think we recorded our pilot, right, the dialogue, in 2019. So it had been years and years, and they were great. And then it was like time for the show to come out and for all of us to promote and celebrate it. And Jack particularly was like, he's very committed to his union and to labor, and he was like, hey, I can't promote the show, even though I know that like animation is not necessarily what we're striking. Like it is a bad look for me to go do this. And I was like, I understand. So we canceled our panel at Comic-Con, we turned it into a screening, we did very limited press, and we're really lucky and I think fortunate that the show succeeded despite that. But it was the right thing to do, and I'm glad we did it. But I'm really excited for season 2, when no one will be under, hopefully, because our contract for animation is up soon, but hopefully no one will be under any kind of like immediate restrictions, or have to make sacrifices to support their labor union. We can kind of have a party and get together and congratulate each other.
So yeah, so you guys were just, for you guys as writers and directors and animators, you guys were just business as usual. You guys were, because I know I saw a little bit of a press from you guys, and again, I know you guys been working on season 2. So again, but again, so it wasn't really stopping you guys, but it was obviously something you guys were feeling.
Yeah, it was something that we were feeling, and it like there were certain things that we didn't do when SAG announced they weren't doing Comic-Con. We didn't do that. I think Jack and Alice and Ishmael all did some like web press and print press interviews, and we did too. But yeah, we it just kind of put a freeze on everything, but it didn't hurt the show, and it just kind of like delayed the celebration that's going to happen this summer when everybody gets together and panel and have fun.
So if someone had to pick up, because again, I always speak in comic book terms. So if someone had to pick up your issue 1, or some people, some guests have actually argued that it should be secret, issue 0. But like, if someone had to pick up your first issue of your origin story of how you got into this business, what would that sort of origin look like?
Oh man, where would I start that story?
Always enough on the planet Krypton. You're always on this planet, and like maybe not as much capes.
No, yeah, not as many capes. So if you want to start on Krypton, I grew up in southeastern Louisiana, just kind of loving narrative. I loved books, and I loved movies, and I loved comics, and I loved TV. And it didn't super occur to me that that was a job until we were doing like a worksheet in the 2nd grade. And I think it was to teach us phonics, but it was like animators have to draw mouth shapes for the characters when they talk. And can you match the mouth shape to the letter? And I was like, wait, that's a job? like I was like, wait, you can do that for a living? And then we rented The Rescuers Down Under from, it wasn't even a Blockbuster. It was this gas station that rented videos. So we rented the Rescuers Down Under from the gas station, and it had one of those little Disney behind the scenes featurettes. And I watched a guy animate the eagle, and I was like, I want to do that job. So that's the Krypton exploding. And then, I went to school. I kind of like had lost that, that childhood purity of what I wanted to do. In college, I was going to be an English teacher. But I failed an animation course, and it like really pissed me off that I had failed this animation course. So I went and I took it again. And the second time, I did well enough that I was offered a scholarship to change over to the animation program. I took that, and I made a short film. Put that in the festival circuit, and then kind of like came out to LA to see what was available for me. And then I worked like a whole bunch of different jobs, man. I have been a screenwriter, a storyboard artist, a background designer, a live action storyboard artist. I've done development work. I've done art direction, and I've been a storyboard director. So I've done all these different jobs for the last, since 2014, I guess. Writing has probably been like the bulk of my income, but I would take, like, if I was doing non-tag writing work, then I would take some tag storyboard work to like stay in the union or whatever. Not stay in the union or whatever, stay in the union and keep my health insurance. Mm-hmm. So I worked all these jobs, and I got to know the pipeline and like kind of how animation worked. And I'd been developing shows in the background with friends. Like I developed a kind of a Power Rangers inspired thing for Nickelodeon called Laser Friends that I did with Anthony Holt and Stephanie Gonzaga for a while. I did like a pitch Bible and a pilot for Ubisoft for one of their games that wasn't successful enough to merit a TV show. I developed another thing with Moonbot for also Nickelodeon. And then while I was at Nick on the Invader Zim movie, I started talking to Brendan Clawher, who was also a director at Nick. He was on Ninja Turtles. And we were just kind of talking about superhero fatigue, ironically, since now
I'm seeing it.
Since we're now contributing to that. And we were talking about, like, if you told me, right, when I was in high school or middle school that like there would be 3 movies about superheroes every year, I would be like, great. But once, or I guess 5 really. Geez, I don't even know how many there were last year. There were 4 just from Warner Brothers last year. Forget about Marvel.
Oh yeah, there
you go. We're probably pushing 10. So I would have been thrilled, and I was not feeling thrilled anymore. So we're talking about how we've gotten tired of this stuff, but like, what would we still want to work on? And I was like, well, Superman, he's the best. And Brendan was like, he is the best. Nobody likes Superman. Everybody says Superman's not cool. I'm like, that's because they are fools.
Exactly.
So we talked about what we like about Superman, what makes him the best, and what we would do with him And it turned out we kind of like had the same ideas. We had similar visions for what we wanted. I think his was a little more skewed towards the Dragon Ball of it all, right? Like you go to DBZ, which was inspired by Superman, and you bring some of that back home to the Man of Steel, and see how he'll benefit from some of those parts. And I think I was probably a little more on the Sailor Moon side of things, where I was like, yeah, I want Clark Kent to not be Superman yet. I want him to be a dweebus, right? Like I want him to grow into this person who he's not, for Clark to be the real guy, and for him to have to learn how to be Superman, and maybe create that person with his friends, in a little more Sailor Moon sort of way. So we smashed those together. And then this is the wild thing. We never even approached Warner Brothers. Like we were talking about this and we're like, next week we'll reach out, because Audrey Deal, who had been my exec at Nickelodeon, had moved over to WB. But before we could reach out, Audrey emails me and is like, hey, do you have any Super Family ideas? And we'd already started doing the art for it. Like we never even got to ask them if they wanted to see it. So we went in and we pitched it, and they put it in development, like right there in the meeting.
That is wow. Like the fact that within just 1 week, and then like almost like that is obviously the universe putting you on the right track. And what's the time period? Like what year was this?
This is like April 2018, I think.
Okay.
And yeah, it took us a long time to get through development. So we're in development on the show for like a year. And the thing that stayed that everybody liked was we liked the larger arc of Clark's getting to know his powers, and we liked the character dynamics between Clark, Lois, and Jimmy. And like the designs that we had for them pretty much at the beginning of development, and the characters that they were pretty much at the beginning of development stayed. We were trying to figure out what to do with antagonists and like how to pace everything and how to kind of like scale the story so that we didn't rush through everything too fast, so that Clark got to stay young for a while. Lois and Jimmy didn't turn into Pulitzer Prize winners immediately. So we took a while to kind of like check it out. And then Brendan and I went in and pitched the show and sold the show to HBO Max, and they ordered the pilot script. And that is when we contacted and brought in Josie Campbell, who would be our co-producer and story editor. And then we started writing the pilot together. HBO Max did not like the pilot script. We did some notes. They still did not like the pilot script. And I think, so one of the things I like about Warner Brothers Animation, one of the things that I like about Warner Brothers Animation is that their studio execs tend to have and stick to their opinions. So I've been at other places and developed at other places where if your boss says, I don't like this script, you say, oh yeah, me either. Those creatives, they've really failed us. And then you let them go. Sam Register at Warner Brothers Animation was like, you're wrong, and I'll show you you're wrong. Jake, Brendan, storyboard and animatic. And so we started the animatic February 2020. And then the world ended, right? So for all of COVID, for like pretty much the entirety of lockdown, we're like sitting there storyboarding this thing, creating an animatic, trying to get it right. Josie leaves, just me and Brendan revising and changing and finishing. We bring in an editor. We lose him. We get another editor. Anyway, about a year and change after that, we now have the animatic. We send it to the new HBO Max people, the pilot animatic. We repitch them the show. We get the green light. And I think we got the green light like less than a month after the vaccine got released.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So the COVID vaccine hits and then we're in production. Because I remember I took a vacation. I brought my family up to Big Sur like right before we started production to kind of say goodbye to them, my wife and child. And I had been vaccinated for like maybe a week, a couple days when we like left on that vacation.
Oh, wow.
So that's the path.
That's a rapid pace for, something as big as Superman, because like, again, from a conversation between you and a colleague, and then the next week Warner Brothers wanted to meet you, and then the pandemic. But that's the thing, because so much during the pandemic, live action they could do they
Right.
could barely do anything. But you guys are in animation. You guys can work from home and storyboard and animate and stuff like that. So that is, you know, I think that's the power of animation, you know, during any any world crisis.
Yeah, when two dudes can make a TV show in their bedroom, as long as we've got, you know, as long as we've got the records, and we were under COVID protocols for most of the records for season 1 and 2. So I didn't record in person until we were doing ADR on our last episode. And I got to record at the old rest in peace Cartoon Network building with a couple of actors, with Deborah Wilson and Rick. But yeah, so we were, in some ways it was fast, and then in some ways it was like a year for the show Bible, a year for the pilot script, and another year for the animatic. So 3 years in development and then green light. But the we have an idea to we're in development was like lightning fast. I think that was less than a month. And then 3 years.
Before you got to Superman, you know, from the jobs you worked on before, you know, as art director and, you know, working with visual and so on, like, because again, everyone has their own path to becoming a showrunner in this industry. So how, like, what were influences for you? Like, who were people around you that you took lessons away from with you as you went into Superman? Because, you know, it's it's not every day you hear, you know, someone who works within doing art directory or doing visuals or doing storyboards, and then suddenly now they're the co-creator and the co-showrunner of a show like this.
Yeah, so I think I've got a couple different people who influenced me when I was coming up, and then some experiences that influenced me. So Brian Burns, who was the supervising producer, I think, on the Invader Zim movie, Enter the Fortress, where I was storyboard director, he had come up kind of like I had, making his own films and doing his own stuff, and was now producing animation. And he had showrun Bravest Warriors and then done some supervising producing for DreamWorks and was now on Zim. And he was interesting because while he was an artist and had come up in art, he did not draw. So Brian had a rule that, like, when I'm producer, I don't draw on anything. I was the director, so I drew on everything. But he taught me a lot about writing. We talked about his approaches, and I was writing 2 different features for 2 different clients at the time. So we talked about how he did it, and I learned, I think, a lot from him about how much happens in editorial, if that makes sense. Like, when you talk to showrunners who really specialize in one discipline, I think a lot of what you hear is like, okay, so for example, I have a friend who runs shows who is a writer, and he will tell you that it's all in the script, man. Like, that's where it's at. And I think that feels true for a lot of live action showrunners. If you came from storyboards, you'd be like, it's all in the board, right? And Brian would tell me that it was all in the cut. And so he's like, we get the script. That's good. Script's a starting place. We make our animatic. That's great. Now we have kind of an episode to work with, but where it lives and dies is like in editorial. So it's in timing, and it's in punching stuff up and tearing something out and putting something back in and trimming out the fat. And I hadn't learned that skill previously. Like, I directed stuff. I directed 2 commercials at Moonbot and some of my own films, but I hadn't had to take someone else's work, 22 minutes of someone else's work, and be like, okay, how do we fix this? How do we get this to where it needs to be? Sometimes you get 22 minutes of someone else's work and you're like, thank you, this is better than I'd hoped and imagined. It's going to be hard to even cut this down to time because I don't want to lose a frame of it. And then sometimes it's like, okay, so we lost the thread. We lost the plot here somewhere, and this has got to get tuned up. And Brian taught me that skill of being able to take something and see it as like clay to shape. That was Brian. Because I think you get a lot done in the editing booth. Matt Youngberg, who was the showrunner on the DuckTales reboot, I worked for him a little bit, and he's a friend, and he taught me a ton too. I learned a couple of important things from him on how to, because I had written, but I'd never dealt with other writers, right? Like, I was always the writer being managed. I had never managed a writer. So he was like, this is this is how you talk to other writers. This is like the level of kind of like leeway that you need to give them, because I think I was being a little micromanaging. And he's like, you need to step back. You need to give people space to work. And you want to task people to the jobs that they will most succeed at. So I learned a lot about management from him. I learned a lot about keeping a show culture healthy from him. And then the formative experiences that I had were mostly directing those commercials at Moonbot. We did one for the Ad Council, and we did like a short film for Gatorade about Usain Bolt. And I learned how to take a story from script to board to production to post to shipping, and just like touch it at every place and manage it at every place, and make sure that all the trains ran on time and that the product was delivered. I learned the nuts and bolts of that there. And then on Zim, I'd never been funny. Like, I'd never done comedy. So I'd done a lot of action and I'd done drama, but on Zim, I learned the like craft of making things funny. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely.
There's an art to it, and there's also just like some elbow grease. And it was on Zim with Brian and Jonan and those board artists, like Moss Lawton and Tyson Hess, Serena Wu, that like we got in there and brute forced something into being funny and fun to watch. Because I'd never done that. I was like, well, comedy's very spontaneous, and it's like, no, comedy is very hard work. So that after all that, I walked into Superman with some action experience, some comedy experience, some drama experience. I'd written, I'd directed, I'd designed, I'd art directed. Oh man, art directing on Pantheon was huge because I had a crew of 50 people, and I'd never managed a team that big. And that was like my first dry run, and like, this is how you manage a large group of people with multiple department supervisors and give everyone enough space to breathe while still keeping a unified vision. And even with all that, I walked into Superman like very unprepared. It was an absolute shock.
The Showrunner Whisperer is brought to you exclusively by Multiverse of Color. Multiverse of Color is your home for fresh takes on the world of pop culture by established journalists and emerging content creators. It is your one-stop destination for a vast array of articles, as well as audio and video productions. Multiverse of Color features exclusive interviews, media event coverage, and film analysis. From Hollywood's biggest blockbusters to the most intimate independent projects. Visit multiverseofcolor.com for all the latest stories, and follow Multiverse of Color through the social media links in the description below. And now, back to the Showrunner Whisperer.
Well, let's go over to that. Let's talk about what I call a masterpiece of, because again, and I'm not saying this to blow smoke up your ass. I grew up with Superman since a kid. Again, you just look at my background, you will see.
Yeah, I saw it.
Stuff. Yeah, and the thing is, like, I was just astonished. Oh my god, they're finally gonna give Superman a chance to be in animation again as a TV show, because we haven't had a Superman animation since Superman the Animated Series in the 90s. And so you walk in there, and what's interesting, because as I was researching, and I was, because I was covering a lot of the show when it was in development and announced, so on, is that you guys came really at a time where Warner Bros. Was really going through all sort of different regime changes, from post AT&T merger to new directions at HBO Max to Warner Bros. Discovery merger and so on. So before we even got the first episode last summer, I think the best way for me to answer is how did you all survive this? Like, because there were times where us journalists, we didn't even know, is the show still happening? Because at first we'd heard there's a 2-season order for it's going to air on HBO Max and Cartoon Network, and then we didn't hear anything, and Adult Swim came in much later. So tell me about your trauma surviving this.
So we got really lucky. Okay, so I've worked on I've developed enough things, and I've failed, or I guess many of them have died in development, is another maybe a healthier way to put that. And the reason things die in development is usually, in my experience, because of corporate political situations outside your control. And by corporate political, I don't mean DEI. I mean exactly these kinds of mergers and corporate beheadings and regime changes. Like, that's what kills your show. So when the stuff that I had at Nickelodeon died, everything at Nickelodeon died. All of it. SEMA got ousted. They brought in new blood. I don't even know who's there anymore. Chris Viscardi, I believe, left. And they just axed the whole development slate, salted the earth, and replanted somewhere else because for various reasons. So I'd seen that happen a whole bunch. Part of how we managed to get on the air with Superman is that our studio leaders were very, very savvy. So I think Superman was one of a series of things that WBA studio leadership. I don't think I'm implicating anyone in devious doings, but I think I am kind of.
No,
like,
it sounds like they were being supportive. They were trying for you guys.
Well, they were being supportive, and we were useful to them. So I think Superman was part of a slate of shows when the AT&T merger got announced that for WB was like, look at what we can do for you. Right. So it was like, we're gonna give you a Superman cartoon, we're gonna give you a Gremlins cartoon, we're gonna do these comedies. And so I think that being useful to the host organism was how we got greenlit in the first place, right? Like for Superman to get greenlit was going to be a win for WBA. And so WBA worked very hard and also worked us very hard to get that to happen. Because the studio wants what's best for itself. And so we were lucky that like our goals and the studio's goals were aligned. Cool. So we get into production, but then to your point, there are more mergers and acquisitions and more chaos coming down the pipe. So the best sense that I can make of what happened from like a business perspective, because like from a creative perspective, what happened was apocalyptic and terrible. We like took years and years and years of people's lives and the art that they'd made, and we threw it away without ever letting it see the light of day. And by we, I mean certain people. And that was a strategy to try to reduce debt and gin up some capital because of Zaslav's acquisition of Warner Brothers and its affiliate properties from AT&T. Just like you didn't know if the show was still alive, there was a period where we didn't know if the show was still alive. And I'd go into art review like twice a week, the same artist would be like, do we still have a show? And it was this weird vibe of being like, well, no matter what happens, we're still a family and I love you all very much. You know what I mean? Like I didn't know I didn't have the power. So it was like, Daddy doesn't know if he'll still have a job next week. Papa is hoping that things will work out. And the best narrative that I have for what happened is this. You have 10 years before Superman gets pitched, right? Netflix enters the game and does the tech disruption thing, which is to find a way to sell a product more conveniently to people, right? In this case, on their phones and computers and smart TVs, rather than through linear cable, where things only air at a certain time of day. So sell it to them more conveniently and sell it to them below market price. So this is how like Lyft and Uber put all those cab businesses either on the back foot or entirely out of business, right? So they come and they do that for entertainment, and they're selling a ton of entertainment. They're selling it at a loss, and they're selling it in a new way. And it's a model that's not sustainable. It's a model that you use to grab a bunch of market share so that by the time your competitors get wise, you own the whole market for the new thing being streaming. So they start that play and they're really successful and they're able to keep operating at a loss because Netflix keeps growing and their stock keeps going up. And as long as the stock price is going up, the shareholders are happy and you are allowed to continue unprofitably operating at a loss. And investors are willing to plug their capital in because the stock price keeps going up. Okay, so around the same like 3-month period, Netflix experiences its first quarterly contraction and their stock price plummets. And all of a sudden, these investors are no longer happy to be operating at a loss. And Netflix has to get profitable now. And Warner Brothers gets bought by Discovery. So all at once, it's like every studio in town looks around and is like, hey, Disney Plus loses $1 billion a quarter. What are we going to do about that? Wow, we've never made a cent on HBO Max. What are we going to do about that? And everyone realizes like, yeah, we've been competing with Netflix for this market share. But it's the market share of an unprofitable market. So all at once, all these big streamers have to get profitable immediately. And one of them, Warner Brothers, is now in debt to the tune of the entire value of the company because we are now responsible for the debt Discovery took out to acquire us, right? So that is the situation in which we find ourselves when things start getting cut. And it is again, creatively terrible what happened. And I'm not trying to justify it, but to explain, I think, the logic behind it, again, not to apologize for, but like the way I see what actually happened. The plan has been, if stuff is going to go on to Max, it has to make its money on cable or in theatrical first, because it's not going to make money on Max. Max does not at this time, I think, still make money. So for that to be profitable, we have to pay for these things on linear. And I think the reason that Superman survived was, and it was Adult Swim. Adult Swim saw, this is a show that can appeal to our audience. We run a lot of anime. This is anime adjacent. Superman is a big IP, and people will go to bat for it. And the show is all ages enough, even though we made it for families, but it's all ages enough that adults can enjoy it, right? So they made the decision to put it on Adult Swim at midnight on Thursdays. And I got to tell you, Andy, I was terrified. I was like, everyone's gonna hate it. They're going to be like, why is this baby crap following Rick and Morty? Why? Basically, just I was expecting, or I guess afraid of, a big why from consumers. And I was really pleased that people were like, oh, it feels this way because it is a Superman show and Superman feels this way. It doesn't feel like a baby show. It feels like a Superman show because this is who Superman is. Or one of the things that Superman can be, right? You can have Injustice Superman. You can have Man of Steel Superman, but this is a fairly classic and well understood version of Superman that's in the cultural vocabulary. So, and then I think also the anime adjacency helped us. So we were able to make our money on cable and survive to see Max. And we did not lose the show, and we did manage to get made.
But yeah, let's talk, because one thing I always want to talk to you about with the show is, because I grew up on, because you mentioned Sailor Moon, I'm like, he's speaking my language now, because I'm like, I wasn't so much of a Dragon Ball Z. I never grew up on Dragon Ball Z. I will fight anyone who ever says, Dragon, like Goku can beat Superman. I'm like, the hell he can. But Sailor Moon is like, that's my, that's like my Bible for me. So the idea of doing Superman with like you said, an animation adjacent style, was that something you guys had to convince Warner Bros., or was that something they were like, yeah, let's try something new, because this is something very unique, especially for the superhero landscape? Because we have the Invisible, Invisible on Prime, we have some of the things on Marvel, but again, this style, also of course in the post Spider-Verse world, I'm assuming studios want to try something new. So what was this discussion like for you guys of trying to get this animation style?
So it was really interesting because, okay, the anime vernacular is not something that I drew any of our pitch art in. I tried to keep it ambiguous. So I did drawings that were like as sketchy and unfinished as they could be, while still clearly being like Superman, Lois, Jimmy. I only did like rough pencil stuff with a little tone on it. Brendan, who comes from Voltron and Korra and like that whole school of animation, he went full anime on it. But in that more Voltron Korra kind of way, which I think is the style the show eventually evolved into. So he was doing that, and I was like, cool, I'll leave my stuff a little more ambiguous. But the storytelling was anime before the visuals were, if that makes sense. Like what we were pitching is, Clark Kent's best friend and his new crush are desperate to know who this flying guy is, and it is his job to help them find out that it's him, which he does not want them to know. And that's the very, I mean, like you can name several different things happening in Japan that have that premise right now, right? Like Spy Family is daddy's a spy, mommy's an assassin, little girl's a psychic. She knows who both of they are, and she's trying to keep them from finding out who the other is. Like we said, Sailor Moon has that same kind of conflict in it. It is a conflict that was birthed in Superman, right? Like that comes from the original material, but we were kind of like pushing that angle in a more anime hijinks, wacky sort of way. And like the kind of fun mistaken identity stuff that you can do in like Ranma, right? So the storytelling, the anime stuff was already there. And kind of, because I think we think of anime as a visual style, but it's also a kind of just like very broad cartooning. And it's a way, like anime has a way of honing in on pushing up and stripping out everything that doesn't work for like a comedic concept or like an action concept. Like anime is pushed. So we were already there in that space. And Brendan's drawings were already kind of laying some anime groundwork. But the executives were still not, like our studio execs were still not sure that that's how they wanted it to look. So we did a couple of character artists. We had a couple of character artists do tests. And one of them was Christy Sang, who was on Spider-Verse and is really talented. She was also on Voltron with Brendan previously. And it was Christy. Like her art, the designs that she did in development are the designs that you see on screen. When they're being drawn correctly, those are Christie's designs. They were so compelling that everyone was just like, well, this is the show. And I thought we were going to have a longer, harder fight about it. And we had already kind of started to arm wrestle. But once Christie's art hit the table, you couldn't argue with it. Clark Kent was so hot. Lois Lane was like so mischievous. Jimmy Olsen was your best friend. It was all right there in the work. And so she brute forced the style through with the power of her talent.
Because I'm a nerd for this. Because before this, of course, this aired and this, people on social media were seeing this. Like how much, because again, that's that first time he not puts on this when he literally freaking transforms. Like it's the Clark version of Moon Prism Power, for God's sake. Like how many times were you like, oh my God, we're making Clark into Sailor Moon. Like this is freaking awesome.
So what's funny is we had launched that team and we told them, okay, so that episode was a pain in script. And like, because to your point, kind of about how Sailor Moon the visuals are, Clark's whole arc there was really hard to get through and to help everybody to understand because it's so internal. Like Lois and Jimmy have a conflict. They are trying to catch the woman who tried to murder them yesterday, right? They're like trying to find this criminal. They're following clues. It's very Scooby-Doo. Clark's kind of like wandering around in a field having feelings. And everyone was like, that's your pitch? Clark wanders around in the field having feelings? And I was like, no, it's going to be good. Trust me, it's going to be good.
It's a pilot after all. Like this is like, this is how you set the foundation.
Yeah. Well, and like he has to in that episode to which we're referring, Clark has to decide that this part of himself that he's been afraid of his whole life needs to be explored. And I think we get there in that conversation with Lois when she's like, a man flew down from the sky and saved us. Don't you want to know who that is? And that's when he realizes that he doesn't know who that is. And he's run away from that guy his whole life. And it's like time to go find him. But that going and finding him does kind of feel like standing in a field for him. Anyway, so emotionally, we knew what that needed to be. It was about finding the action that expressed it. And then when we gave it to story, I remember saying like this transformation into Superman needs to feel special. And it needs to feel, magical. I don't think I said magical girl, but Diana He, who's an anime dork of my same age, was the director. Jess Zamet, who'd been on me with Ninja Turtles, was the board artist for that sequence, and they knew what magical meant, right? And they're like, cool, yeah, so Pretty Soldier Superman, on it, got it. And
I love that.
What's cool about Jess, because Jess did, I think, all of that spaceship, Void, Krypton stuff. What's cool about Jess is that Jess has the magical girl anime influences to her art, but she's also informed by a lot of darker stuff like Blam or Dorohedoro. She's really into mood, not just like the kind of visual pun of Superman, but Sailor Moon. So she built up to that moment with all this like really cool, stark alien, these cool, stark alien landscapes. And this like very moody film language, and then music and color and the boards all hit so that when we do that Sailor Moon transformation, it doesn't feel like a joke, in my opinion. Like it feels sincere, and you're like excited to see it. You're not like, haha, that's a magical girl. You're like, oh my God, that's a magical boy.
But for me, it was like the best of both worlds. Like, if anyone jokes about it, I will drag their asses, because I'm like, listen, like we never get again. Because this is what I think is so special about your show is that yes, you're talking about it this is very much, going back to some of the classic traits, but you guys are also reinventing a lot of this mythology for, for a whole new generation that had, maybe never picked up a single comic book of Superman in their entire lives. So, it's like, I would find it hard to believe that anyone looked at it as a joke. If anything, like, this is what happens when you can bring so many creative people together from different backgrounds.
That's really it. And it was really fun to benefit from that, because we knew we wanted it to feel mythic. My favorite shot in that sequence is the one where he rises up out of the ship in the cornfield and is like lit from beneath, and you see those obelisks like floating around him. I remember like losing my mind when that came back in animation, and then Daniel Future and Dom Lewis, who did the music, really sold that moment. And Danny gave us that like spooky techno Krypton choir that kind of like announced like, here is your god. And so, yeah, everybody really sold that moment. Everybody was firing on all cylinders. Studio Mir did a great job executing it. Design did a great job with like the color, the planning. Jess and Diana did a great job boarding it. And I feel really lucky because in script, it really is like Clark has some feelings in a field and in a void. And then they were like, and these are the feelings now that you, the viewer, have. And those came from the artists who made the shot.
Now, working with, not just for Warner Brothers, but also you're having, you're working, of course, with DC, with these properties, like how much, because again, you there's a lot of reinvention, there's a lot of new take on these characters that we haven't seen before, both visually, where they come from, and how much freedom were you guys given of being able to, we're going to, to honor the spirit of these characters, but we're also, we want to bring something 21st century to them, if that makes sense.
We were given quite a bit of freedom, and I was really thrilled. Both of the mics in DC, who were our points of contact and our approvals for that stuff, were really generous and understanding. And when they pushed back on something, they usually helped us find a better solution. And then Warner Brothers Animation was incredibly supportive. The only notes we'd get from WBA were like, do you have a clarity issue? Or we are straying. They were really concerned. And this was funny to me because I think the DC brand has been pretty dark for a while. And maybe because of this, our series execs were really concerned that we maintain the kind of like positive tone. And so sometimes we'd arm wrestle a little bit where I was like, we need to have conflict still. Like, I hear you, but we also need these like dark moments. But they didn't want it to go into that edgy space. They wanted it to stay like optimistic and hopeful. And most particularly, and this was great, they were with us in wanting it to stay centered on our heroes, on three best friends, right? So I felt really supported the whole time. Mike Carlin, who this amazing career presiding over Superman for DC Comics, Superman Red and Blue, Death and Return, like a whole bunch of great stuff. He would sometimes worry that like you're referencing something that wasn't successful for me in the 90s. And I'd be like, yeah, it wasn't successful because the older fans then didn't like it, but we were kids and we love it. And the people watching the show are going to love it. It's going to be good. It's going to be good. And he would be like, I think you're stupid, but I'll let you do it.
Because I remember the day when that first image came out. Again, this was 2-season pickup, whatever. We got that first image.
Yeah.
Do you remember? Like, did you go online and look at what people were saying? Kind of like, because this was, there was no footage. There, we knew. I don't know if the cast had been announced. We just knew that 2 seasons. These are our free leads. This is the style, animation style. What do you remember from that day?
I was deliberately out of cellular service on that day. I was in Big Sur, California, hiking with my family. I did not want to know about it. I rarely enjoy watching the information about a show that hasn't been released hit its potential fandom, because I think justifiably a lot of people start to worry about like the integrity of this property that they love, and like often the initial reaction is very defensive. When I got back, there was some of that, but there was just a whole lot of like funny, like himbo Superman fan art. Like people had a lot of fun with the Clark design. A couple people like immediately picked up what we're putting down and were like, oh my gosh, these two are going to ruin his life. And I was like, yep, that's the show. that's the show. Is Lois and Jimmy are going to ruin his life. So it was really nice to see that the response was mostly positive, and mostly enthusiastic, and that people understood from the one image, like the show that we wanted to make. Because a thing I think a lot and say a lot about these characters, like they've been around for, almost 100 years because they basically write themselves. Once you know who Clark Kent and Lois Lane and Jimmy Olsen are, the fun and like it just starts to happen. And I enjoyed watching the fan community like start having that fun just from the promo image, that they were like, oh, I see these three personalities. I see the chemistry and how they interact. I know exactly what kind of fun we're going to have. That was really gratifying. And Brendan Clawher, by the way, did the original of that image. And then I believe Do Hong, who became our character lead, cleaned it up for publication.
Something that, of course, has been, of course, both celebrated, but of course discussed about is, for example, we see Lois and Jimmy, for example, in a very new light. We see, again, like it's, this metropolis feels like what the real world feels like today, where, you see cultures from all over the world. How important was it for you guys to diversify Superman mythology for this show? Because we've seen, a little bit here and there, we've had a black Perry White, for example, in the movies. For example, we see it, Lois not depicted as a white woman, or, we see, again, a black Jimmy Olsen getting to now shine in animation. And how important was it for you guys to really add that element to this mythology, knowing that yes, there's gonna be people who love it, and of course there will be people who will do what they do in their basements?
It's really important that Metropolis be welcoming and inclusive to everyone. Like it's otherwise it's not Metropolis. Sorry, I'm sorry. Kind of like Star Trek, Metropolis is the future that you want your children to have, right? Like it's the better place that we as a species are trying to get to. And Superman stories are about protecting and reaching and maintaining that place. Sorry, I didn't
No, do you need a minute?
I didn't think that was going to be that charged. And that is just super important to us. So that was never a question, right? The diversity of the cast is a reflection of that intention, and we tried to have that happen in the city and with our additional characters as well. Like everyone should be welcome in the Kent home. Everyone should be welcome in Metropolis. The only way you become unwelcome in Metropolis is if you like ruin it for yourself and everyone else. So that's just what Superman is to me, and it's what Superman was to the rest of the crew. And so that was never even a question. That was our objective from the start. Like Metropolis is the bright, beautiful future that we can all share with each other, where everyone has dignity and everyone has security and everyone is safe. And we fight to keep that. That's Metropolis.
I apologize. I did not mean for this to get emotional. I'm asking this because, I'm a gay person. I run a website called Multiverse of Color. I am, all about the reason I even run something like Multiverse of Color is because I want to open the door for the next generations of, Persians, Middle Easterns, gay members and whatnot and so on. For me, that's why, when I saw that first image, I'm like, I think this show is going to speak to me very much. I think it's speaking to a lot of people. So I did not, if the viewers, because this will be really an audio, but if people can, just listen to this, this got emotional. I wasn't prepared. And again, it's only because I want this to be absolutely known that, again, there's a reason this show is. There's so many reasons why this show has become so loved, and I think at the end of the day, Superman is the ultimate immigrant story. Yes, the boy is white. We get he grew up in Kansas. The brother is a freaking alien from another planet. So, when people are like, oh, Superman can't be this, Superman can't be that. I'm like, bruh, he ain't American. He landed in a cornfield. So, simmer down a little bit. But that is so great to hear that, for you guys, it's also, because again, something that you guys do so well in the writing is it doesn't become their character trait. Like we don't, it doesn't become like, oh, look how Asian I am as Lois, or look how black I am as Jimmy. It's again, it's who they are. But again, like, we know more about them as characters because of what they do, not for what they look like. And I think that's, in this industry with TV and film, again, we have so much more room to improve for diverse representation. And some studios and networks, They do it great. Some of them is just checkboxes. You guys are obviously the former, not the latter, because it feels organic and it feels natural. So I hope that is known. I hope that's something, because that's the thing. You guys got to make the show before, because you guys had already made a show by the time it aired. So again, it wasn't like, with some other TV shows where like they're still making it and you guys can still see that fan interaction. So you guys had already made it and then got to see everyone really behold it in its entirety.
I'm really glad that you feel that way. We wanted the characters to reflect the world that we live in and the world that we want to live in, and also like the people who made the show, right? Like I said, Diana, who directed that episode we're discussing, she's Korean American, right? And she had a lot of feelings about Lois and a lot to say about like our art director, Jane Bach, also Korean American, and they both put a ton of tiny little touches in there. We never had like the Korean American episode, right? But we tried to give our crew room to express their truth through those characters, visually and in the narrative. And I'm glad that worked for you. I'm really glad that worked for you. You're always, to your earlier point about like checkboxes, you're always terrified that this stuff is gonna you're going to come off as condescending, that you're going to harm the people that you're trying to include. You know what I mean? Like it's always kind of hairy. Everybody on our crew did their best, and I'm glad that their intentions are for you reflected in the product. That makes me really happy.
Well, I think like one of the episodes that really that kind of also honors that is, because I remember, because I got to screen for this first 7, and I think there's a reason why they almost gave us 7 to begin with, because they wanted us to have think something about episode 7, and it was so hard because I kept when I was going on like other podcasts, so and I was like like they were asking like, what do you think about My Super? I'm like, it is amazing, but episode 7, you guys are going to be talking because, again, we see the League of Lois Lanes, which again, I'm like, how have we not already had this already? It's unbelievable that it took us this long to get something like that. And again, you guys are honoring the past, the present, and the future. And I'm just thinking like, working in that writer's room, that first season, this being your first time as a showrunner, how did you go through all that? Like, what were some of the upsides and downsides? What were some of the lessons you learned again, because again, you had a very unique experience getting into this position.
So I'd only written pilots and features. I'd never written in a room. Josie Campbell, who was our story editor, like one of the things that Brendan and I wanted was for all of our department leads to have freedom inside their department, right? So we have to approve everything and we give notes on things. But like if you're the art director, you run art review, right? If you're the story editor, you've got the story room. So the story room was interesting because everyone was figuring out how to do it. Josie had done it with one team before, but every team is different. And our teams changed a little bit between seasons. Season 1, we didn't have enough writers. And because we didn't have like the number of writers that we would have in season 2, I was always in the room. So I had to go like give notes and help the other departments and assist. There are a couple ways to write TV, right? And so one of them is to be like, the creator or the head writer or the showrunner have all the ideas. And in some instances, like in some seasons of True Detective or in James Gunn's Peacemaker, right? Like one person just writes the series. And you're like, I'm only writing 10 episodes. I'm just going to write this. I think on the opposite pole of that is the more writer's room driven version of screenwriting for television, where you're like, okay, we've got a concept. We've got a season arc. We're going to get in, we're going to break this season, and then we'll break individual episodes as a group. And the idea is that everyone contributes their ideas, right? Everyone helps us break story. And 2 heads are better than 1. And with Superman, because we wanted action and comedy and relationship drama in every episode, the whole point of hiring Josie was many heads are better than 1. So Josie had run the writer's room on She-Ra, and she'd run the writer's room on Jurassic, Camp Cretaceous, and she did a great job on Superman season 1. We were a little understaffed in season 1. I was on script for a lot of it, and I was in there all the time. Like I was never not in the writer's room. And that was a lot, and I was really busy, but everybody did a great job. We got it all done. Season 2 was great because we had more writers. We had M. Willis come in as our executive story editor. She's fantastic. She wrote 2 of my favorite scripts of season 2 and helped everybody else when they needed it. And I was able, with Brendan, because Brendan had been full-time writer's room too all through season 1, we were able to like step out and spend time with other departments. And I spent maybe 2/3 to half as much time in the room in season 2 as I did in season 1. Everything ran more smoothly. Part of that was like we'd had writers stick around longer. So everybody had like found their groove. Part of that was that we had more writers, and it just gelled and got done more efficiently and got done faster. And we were in revision less, and I was only on script for 1 episode. It was delightful. So yeah, that was my first experience with that school of screenwriting, like the brain trust big group project. And it was great. And that's how I think Superman should always work, regardless of who's here and on staff. I think that's the way, particularly for a show about a group of pals making it happen. I think that's the way it's got to be. And I'm really grateful, man. Our writers all over-delivered. Everybody put in like that extra mile, gave that extra idea, did that extra revision, so that our story team could try to execute stories instead of fixing them. Because what you don't want to happen in animation is for your storyboard team to be like fixing a story that doesn't work. You want them to be running with a story that works and plussing it, doing what Diana and Jess got to do in season 1, episode 2, right? Taking the concept that's there and elevating it rather than saying, what is this? And trying to save something that's busted. So our story team never had to do that. And I loved the group project writer's room, which I'd never really done before.
I was a couple of during the holidays I was rebinging season 1 because why not? Because I'm like, this show was just so much fun. What was just because again, you guys, like we talked about before, you guys to reimagine some of these characters, particularly the villains in a lot of ways. I remember like when I was shot, I'm like, wait, that's Livewire? Okay, I kind of, this I could kind of see her as like a electric battlefield warrior, but like, do you have a personal favorite of, aside from reinventing Clark, Jimmy, and Lois, was it a favorite DC character like that Clark had to deal with that was kind of like, oh, this is a spin I want to take on, visually and story wise?
So I'm very biased. In me and Brendan's very first pitch in 2018 with Warner Brothers Animation, I was like, and also Mixus Pitalik is a Tenchi Dragon Ball space elf. And because like the League of Lois Lanes and Mixie, that episode was like part of the original pitch before we went to pilot, before we pitched to HBO Max. Like it was always there. And I remember Sam being like, no, he's got a bowler hat. And I was like, we'll figure it out. And we did. We figured it out so that he was a space elf and had a bowler hat. But like, I really wanted that. I love a mischievous little scamp. And I also love that kind of like Jirayan Saiyan school of space magic design. So he was a lot of fun in season 1, and I'm still anxious to bring him back. I love that guy. And David Arrigo, who did the voice, killed it. Grace Liu, who mostly boarded him, destroyed it. The design by Carly and Elaine is great, and Mir did a great job animating him. So he's my favorite. I'm hugely biased. Mixie's my favorite. The show would be Mixie, like at least 30% Mixie. If this was like the solo thing instead of the writer's room, 30% of episodes would feature Mixus Pitalik if it was just Jake writing the show. Other than him, okay, so we had a couple of friends who were designers come in early on and like tool up the villains. Paul Reinwand did some, Chris Anka did some, and the versions of Livewire and Intergang, right? So like Silver Banshee, Roughhouse, and Mist that we've got are Chris Anka concepts. And I like love the weird military goth core clothes that he put them in. I love Banshee's helmet like a lot. Freaking rules. So I had a lot of fun watching those concepts come to life because I'd done concepts for those characters and they were not as good. And inviting my friends to come dunk on me was really fun. And then I think all those got really beautifully animated by Studio Mir. I think they handled those designs really well. So
something that, of course, I have to talk about is this trio of cast that you got. At this point, like the world knew JAKE WYATT, from The Boys, and as trying to stop their evil Superman, and now he is. Can you take me back to landing these 3 people?
Oh man, we were so lucky. Warner Brothers casting is great. So like WBA has a long history of great casting, right? Like going back to Batman the Animated Series, they're fantastic at it. I have friends who have like a catalog in their brains of every character actor working in town, like in live action or in voice. I'm not that guy. The casting directors did an incredible job. It's Agnes and Sarah at Warner Brothers. They did amazing work. And it's funny, I was just doing some season 2 press with the actors, with the cast in Atlanta, because Jack, Alice, and Ishmael are so good. Ishmael's so good that people will see him as Lonnie in Jury Duty and literally not believe me when I'm like, that's Jimmy Olsen. And they're like, that's not Jimmy Olsen. That's an angry older guy. And I'm like, yeah, but that's Jimmy. I mean, he's an actor. Like he plays multiple people. Each of them were great. Jack was Clark Kent. Like, and I didn't watch The Boys. I'd read the comic. I wasn't watching the series. And Jack had been in a couple of things that I hadn't seen and that were great. So I didn't understand who Jack was when I heard his tape. And I was just like, oh, that's Clark. That's Clark Kent. That's my good boy. So Jack was like easy. And then similarly, Alice Lee. So I wish I had the sides. The sides that we wrote for her were like interviewing Superman and trying to squeeze information out of him while also like kind of having a crush on him. And she did it with so much charm and humor and nuance that I was like, yep, that's America's Girlfriend, Lois Lane. That's it. Done. Handled. Like, how do you not fall in love with that performance? And then Ishmael was extremely funny. And also, because like the sides that we have for him are pulled from what will eventually become episode 6, right? They're him kind of like letting Clark Kent down. Like, I know you're Superman, buddy. And he killed that. And he managed to hit both the comedy of that scene and the pathos, right? The genuine and sincere emotions. Because Ishmael's a great comedian, but he's also a great actor. So you can really feel both. Like, we wanted Jimmy to be comic relief, right? But we wanted Jimmy to be a person. Because I feel like often the comedic character never gets a sincere moment or never gets a real arc. And we did not want that for Jimmy. We love Jimmy Olsen. Like Jimmy is America's best friend, right? America's boyfriend, girlfriend, and best friend. Yeah. So we wanted Jimmy to have weight and to get moments where he was heroic. And like a thing that I said when we were doing press for season 1 is that Lois Lane, helps Clark Kent be brave enough to be Superman. Jimmy Olsen helps Clark be safe enough to be brave. He's like this sweet, kind, accepting space, safe space in the center of Clark's life. And yeah, Ishmael just showed like he had the range, man. Yeah. He could do it all. So all of them delivered so hard that it wasn't a choice. It was really obvious in all 3 cases. They're very talented. And here's the other thing. I just spent like 3 days with them. They are wonderful people. They're thoughtful. They're funny. They're kind. They're patient. They're fantastic. I cannot sing our cast praises enough.
No, I mean, again, like this is why I'm hoping this summer that you guys are, again, because I know we don't know when season 2 is coming. I'm not gonna, I know you cannot say much about season 2, but I'm hoping you guys get that Comic-Con panel. Like, like I kind of, for me, if I had to decide, I'm like, I want you all up at that Hall H panel with 7,000 people, like, screening the first episode or 2, whatever. Because again, I think that Superman belongs, in a huge crowd. And again, that's why I'm like, it was a bummer that, with the strikes and, that you guys didn't get to have that moment. But hopefully that will come and for many years to come, because again, we know we have a season 2. I'm up, dare I ask, like, is like season 3, 4, or 5 something you guys have it thought in your heads? Are those seasons in your show Bible, or like where do you see the future of the show?
Brendan and I have written outlines for 3 and 4. They have been creatively approved. I cannot discuss whether they have been greenlit.
No, of course. So, ladies and gentlemen, what he's saying is that absolutely renewal, but no. But But that's good to know that you guys are able to still pitch your studio and they know that you guys have a vision for it. Because I think I'm only asking this because this came up very recently, and would genuinely like to hear your take on this. I don't know if you've been following some of the news about Superman Lois on the CW, but we heard that the cause of the show coming to an end this season is because of Warner Brothers not wanting to have a competing Superman product in the marketplace, as we know James Gunn's DC Universe is coming up. How safe do you guys feel in this space?
Oh man.
Not trying to stir drama. I'm just
Yeah.
asking, because I'm sure, because this was something that came up on Twitter instantly, is this show now in danger? Like, what does this mean?
So I have had no meetings with Mr. Gunn, but I have heard through the studio apparatus that he's been very supportive of our show, and I'm very grateful for that.
Well, that makes me happy to hear. And that's the thing. I hope that people understand that. He said he's not the one pulling the strings of like what gets to get renewed or canceled. Like, of course, I get it's the hire for the students and so on. But like, yeah, obviously, I felt the listeners would murder me if I had, if they knew, like, because again, they don't know this podcast exists yet. So if they knew, like, oh, you spoke to him and you didn't even ask, I'm like, no, listen, I got you covered. I'm always worried because I love the show so much. So on that note, what can you tease anything about season 2? Like, again, no spoiler. I'm not getting you in trouble. I'm not going to get myself in trouble. But what should people know about season 2, especially after that massive season finale? Because, like, damn, y'all just like didn't know when to stop. Like, it was like plot twist. I'm like, and we have to wait how long for season 2? So,
I'm glad you enjoyed the finale. I had a lot of fun writing that last episode with Serena Wu. She is great. She's been a collaborator of mine since Zim. And we had a great time closing that out. That was a lot of fun. And the director and artist, it was Jen Bennett was the director, Grace Liu, Karen Guo, I think Kelly was there. I think that's who was there. Kelly Purdue. Anyway, everybody did a great job. Season 2. So we have some open questions. At the end of season 1, we have conflicting narratives now about Krypton, right? We have Clark's assumptions, and then we have the assumptions we got from learning about Zero Day, and then we have Jor-El's confusing behavior at the end of season 1.
Confusing is a nice way to put it.
Thank you. So we're gonna get more information about that, right? We're gonna get more clarity about Krypton. When we're talking with marketing and we're like, what could be a slogan? And one of them was like, Krypton is coming, right? Because we see those two Kryptonian figures at the end of season 1. They have plans, they have aims, they have a bad vibe. So expect follow up on that, right? Like, we're gonna follow up on the threads that we've planted. Jimmy Olsen's millionaire. So
yeah,
time to have some fun with that. I don't think you can have enough fun with Jimmy Olsen. Like, if anything, I think we still haven't had enough fun with Jimmy Olsen, which is why I want to make more of the show. Because he's like an infinite fun machine. So we're going to find out what millionaire Jimmy's like, and he's going to get a bigger role in the world of the show. So he's still going to be one of our 3 mains, our 3 best friends, but he's going to get a different place in society, in the workforce. You're going to see Lois and Clark's relationship evolve. They haven't actually been dating all that long, and they've only really kind of started to work through Clark's issues. And as it was kind of divisive on the internet when it was revealed in season 1, that Lois Lane also has issues. She does. She was going to continue to have them. So we're going to have to work through some of her stuff, work through more Clark stuff. They will continue to cause themselves and each other problems,
of course,
and we will root for them, hopefully, and cheer for them as they work through those together, and not pick sides between America's sweethearts. I don't see any reason to pit a king and a queen against each other. So all that's going to happen, and hopefully, also most of the questions that people have from season 1 will be answered.
Before you dump new questions on us. So
there will be some new questions, unfortunately.
Oh
yeah. New questions will be raised, and not all of those will be answered.
I was definitely curious about, like, where, because then again, there's no Superman property that where I actually like Sam Lane. Like, I don't like this character at all. But in this one, I'm kind of like, I'm like, okay, so now Amanda Waller's playing him over. Okay, fine. Shit, I guess I gotta care a little bit for him. Is that that might get progressed on between him and Lois?
Yeah, because we don't really know. Sam Lane just sort of disappears at the end of season 1, so we will be following up on that. We're gonna checking in with him. Yeah, he vanished, like he Batmaned out. So we're gonna have to check in with him and see where he's vanished to and what he's up to, and if he's ever gonna really resolve this conflict he has with his daughter.
I know you can't give names, but how deep are we going to the DC universe this year on the scale of 1 to 10?
You know, it's interesting. We're gonna cast a wider net than I even thought we were. Like at the top, because Brendan and I pitched the 2 seasons, and I had an idea of where it was going to go, and we still go there. But like I said, this is a writer's room, right? And so there's a lot of writers, and they got a lot of ideas. And we just went way wider into the DC universe than I thought we would, without, I think, losing the plot on Metropolis. So I hope that viewers will feel that our story is still about 3 best friends and their home and their lives together. I don't feel like we lost that plot, shockingly, because we went wide. And it's a different DC universe than has been previously experienced. And I'm really excited about that too, because that's not just the writer's room. That's our design team made some choices. And we let them. And our storyboard artists made some choices and we supported them. So yeah, we're going to experience a big and different DC universe that has had a different trajectory than the ones that came before it.
Is it a DC universe that you think, because I'm trying to think, what would this team do with Batman, Wonder Woman? I'm thinking, has the word spin-offs ever come up in the writer's room? Kind of like, Adventures verse? No, wait, that's not. What would we call it?
The My Adventure verse. So
that rolls so much better. I will go with that.
So we would have a lot of fun with that. We referred to Superman and Lois earlier. We are part of a very large corporation that is trying to best manage its intellectual property to its greatest commercial and financial advantage, right? So we've pitched some stuff. I've pitched some stuff. There are a few things that have stuck to the wall as far as development. I don't know if those will ever be produced, right? We don't know what's going to see the light of day. Those big marquee characters like Batman and Wonder Woman are probably less likely to show up in our series because we live in a very competitive and sort of like saturated superhero market. So I think you're less likely to see people who can like maybe people who can like star in their own movies are less likely to show up to have adventures with Superman. People who are usually relegated to a supporting cast are probably more likely to show up. Don't expect any of that in season 2.
Like someone like, for example, like Lucy Lane, for example, like,
I would love to do Lucy Lane.
What is does she? Because I was thinking like they never talk about Lois having a suit. Like
we have not established that in the show.
Okay, on purpose, or is it because you guys are, is it because of things you can't talk about?
I don't want to tell people what's going to happen. I also don't want to tell people too much of what's not going to happen. But we have like a crowded show. It's hard to write a show with 3 main characters and villains with arcs and action and romance, like that many little subplots. So it's a crowded space. We had Lucy Lane pitches in the writer's room for season 1 that like we only get 10 episodes a season.
Yeah, exactly.
If we had 24 episode seasons, or 26 episode seasons as is traditional, you'd see a lot more of this like supporting cast stuff happening. What I have found over the 2 seasons that we actually have produced is that we have just enough time to service like the core characters and their arcs and bring in a few fun friends along the way. So like not every idea gets used, and it's not even about the quality of the idea. It's about like, okay, well, which guest stars,
you have 20 minutes basically.
Yeah. And it's which guest stars serve the needs of our main cast. Right. Yeah. And I dearly wish, and it's not just me, like all the writers, Josie, Brendan, everybody wanted like a larger season order where we got to do more, I think what people now call filler, but are like development episodes, right? Like kind of standalone stuff.
Yeah.
Where we get to build out the world and build out the cast and build out the roster a little bit more. But that's not what current television is. And so what we've got instead is like these 10 season arcs that are really tightly focused on our core cast, and we hope compelling and emotionally satisfying. So yeah, so some of that stuff we have not been able to do or build out as much, which is why I'm like, it's a wider DC universe than I had imagined, but not necessarily like one that you'll engage with in the way that you expect watching season 2.
I'm just gonna say this just so that the listeners don't freak out thinking that you're like just like dropped a big scoop on this. I think he meant to say 10 episode season, not 10 seasons. I don't think.
Oh yeah, no. Oh wow, did I say 10 seasons? Yeah, thank you.
I was kind of, because I was like, oh my god, I'm gonna get an email from Warner Bros. When this dropped, and they're like, he did not just confirm 10 seasons. I'm like, no,
we do not have 10 seasons. I can confirm that we don't have 10 seasons, and that we do have 10 episode seasons.
Yeah. Besides Manager Ruben, are you working on anything else right now? Is this kind of like, your main baby right now?
This is main baby, but I'm definitely working on a couple of other things that are not announced, and that I'm really, really, really excited about. And some of them are things that fans of the show will be excited about, should I think logically be excited about when they get announced, and some of them are very different from my adventures. So some of them are like in the space. I think people who like our show will like this other project, and then one of them is pretty left field.
And hopefully, hopefully you can come back and we can talk all about it. But for my final question before I let you go, because this is also something I always ask every showrunner, is if you met someone on the street, or you whether it's a fan or a critic, journalist, whatever that has their conception of the work of a showrunner, if there's a misconception you could clear up, what would that be about this job that you're in?
It's not about being like a singular genius. I think, again, any job can be done multiple ways, and I think some people enjoy I'm going to write the whole season myself, or I'm going to try to direct most of the episodes myself, or like whatever it is. But I think the job possibly should be, though I don't want to tell anyone how to live, more about making a space for other people to be excellent at what they do, right? And to contribute. Like I said, season 2 follows the basic arc that we had figured out for it, but there are so many twists and turns along the way, because we were able to have more writers in the room, on staff, and to make more room for people. We were able to give design some lead time, so that sometimes they got to lead the dance, and they're like, well, this is what we want this location to look like, or this is a thing we'd like to do in the show. And you're like, oh wow, yeah, we can make that happen. That slaps. That rules. So all my favorite moments of like actually running the show are, I've kicked something to someone else, either because I don't have time or because I think they'll be great for it. And then they come back with something that is so much cooler, so much more engaging, so much more moving and meaningful than like whatever thing I had in mind. And I'm like, cool, thanks, you're a genius. And that is always my favorite moment, because that's when it's most like watching TV for me, right? Like it's being moved and impressed and grateful for the talents of other people. I have not yet found a perfect system for like helping everybody do that, right? It's a big, complicated machine, and to a degree, it needs to run in a certain order, in order to get stuff done on time, to get stuff done well, or at least as promised, to deliver what's promised. So still working on how to give everyone the optimal amount of room to absolutely shred and do their best work, while still keeping everything on time and on track to deliver the show that we promised. So I'm not trying to toot my horn as being great at that. But I do think that's the big misconception, is we have this idea in a lot of art forms of like the singular genius, like your Hayao Miyazaki or whoever else, who like redoes everyone's work because they're so talented or great or good, and there's a baked-in assumption that will yield the best result. And I have come to believe that the best result comes from giving other people, helping them understand what we're making, like letting everybody know, like, this is the show we're making, right? This is the target, and then giving people room to reach it in their way, so that they can surprise you and delight you and do their best work.
And I think that's a perfect place to wrap. But Jake, thank you so much for sharing your again, what a journey. Again, this is what I love, hearing from each owner of, like, everyone does this differently. Again, this all started with you just having a conversation, and 1 week later, they're like, do you have ideas for Superman? And here you are. So
I'd also like to hear at the end, because I feel like I didn't do this enough throughout the interview. I'd love to stress the huge and important role that my show writing partner, Brendan Clogher, played in all this. He is the quieter of the two of us. I'm Jake the Mouth Wyatt. But like, so many of these concepts are his, so many of these ideas are his. He did so much work for the show. He gave so much support to the crew. Like, he's not here in the interview to speak for himself, but Brendan did an amazing job, was an amazing partner, and was an amazing leader and coach and defender for everyone else on the show. And I really want to, he's fantastic. Wouldn't have pitched it without him. Wouldn't have had the idea without him. Like, it was our idea, and I couldn't have done my half of it without him.
Yeah, no, of course. I know, if I ever get a chance to talk to him, of course I want to hear his journey as well. And I'm sure you didn't leave him out. It was, again, there's only so much you can say from your experience of all this. But I'm excited about season 2. I'm excited to see what you guys are going to bring to life. Hopefully, please come back. Let me geek out with you more about this adventure that we all get to go on. Again, last summer was the best summer ever for TV, I think, because of this show, because everything was on strike, but we got, you guys brought Superman back to TV.
I am so glad that you feel that way. And yeah, this was a joy. I'd be happy to come back whenever. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And welcome back. That was my chat with Jake, who he's such a lovely guy. I cannot wait to chat with him again, hopefully very, very soon. But yeah, My Adventure with Superman season 2 premieres this Saturday on Adult Swim at midnight. The first 2 episodes, they're amazing. There's so much to look forward to. And yeah, hopefully we can have him back maybe after the season 2 is over, and we can have a little post-mortem and break it down a little bit. So no, Jake is awesome. He's lovely, and he's goofy just like me, very chaotic, and I love that. So, but with that said, we're gonna wrap it up here for this episode of the Showrunner Whisperer. First of all, if you want to find me, you can find me at Andy Behbakht all over social media. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Threads, YouTube, you name it. I'm also an independent journalist for Screen Rant, where I actually did chat with the cast and also with Jake and the other producers of My Adventures with Superman for the new season. So check it out. There's a lot. I've been having a lot of great interviews with Screen Rant lately, so go check them out. I also keep you covered with all the latest superhero news across television and film. And also, I'm the editor-in-chief of Multiverse of Color, which is the home and destination that has made this podcast, this show, possible for all of you. And I also stream on Twitch, Kick, and YouTube. So if you want to see me play video games horribly, because I ain't good at it, find me there. Come chat with me. And in terms of course, where you can find the Showrunner Whisperer, you can find the Showrunner Whisperer on. First of all, we're gonna start with Facebook at the Showrunner Whisperer, as of course at Multiverse of Color. On Facebook, those are the official places where Facebook, at least. On Twitter, actually, we will say Twitter last. For Instagram, we're at Showrunner Whisperer and at the Multiverse of Color on Instagram. And yeah, I want to get rid of the "the" in that handle for the Multiverse of Color, but that's where and on Twitter, that's right, I'm still not going to call it X. We're at Showrunner Talk and at Multiverse Color. That's where you can find us, because we apparently putting in an "uff" in there for Multiverse of Color in the handle was just too long. It was just too long. And on Threads, we're on at Showrunner Whisperer and at Multiverse of Color, the Multiverse of Color. of course, on Threads. And on TikTok, we're at Showrunner Whisperer and at Multiverse of Color. So go find all those links can be found in the show notes. So check it out. Follow, keep updated with us. Also tweet at us, or put, comment at us. Tweet, send us messages, notes of what you're thinking about the podcast, or what you're thinking about the show. If you had like a favorite guest so far, and yeah, as far as where you can listen to all the podcasts at all the destinations, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, you name it, can be found in the show notes. Listen to the Showrunner Whisperer wherever you get your podcast at. That's what's up. And if you have questions, or if you have suggestions for the podcast, email at showrunnerwhisperer@gmail.com, and what we can improve on. And also at some point, because at some point when we get a little bit further in, a little bit bigger, we will start announcing when we have guests coming up. So if you have questions for said showrunner about maybe one of your favorite TV shows, you can send questions to that email or use any of the social handles that I just listed. But that's gonna be it. Of course, remember, hit that 5-star review on Apple Podcast. It would mean so much to me. It's the, like for me, like I don't need money. The only support I need is your enjoyment, and of course, some good positive reception publicly that we can have on Apple Podcasts and other places where people can listen to podcasts at. So if you could just do that little favor for me, it just takes a couple of minutes. It's something you can do from your phone so easily. It would mean the world to me. But that's going to be it for this episode of Showrunner Whisperer. Look forward to another episode in early June, which will be part 2 of the Chad and James conversation, and more showrunners to come. I have some being recorded very, very soon, so look forward to that. But as always, for all of my amazing team members here on the Showrunner Whisperer, Julian Bell, Nate Milton, Mike Schmidt, who make all of this happen, I'm Andy Behbakht, and I will see you next time on the Showrunner Whisperer.